All right, let's just jump right into it. Have you ever thought about this really weird paradox? I mean, it's right at the heart of our entire global economy. Pretty much every single country on the planet is in debt. So, if everybody owes money, who exactly is the one getting paid? Just take a second and look at this number. $318 trillion. It's a number that's so big, it's kind of hard to even wrap your head around it, right? But that's where we were. Total global debt, early 2024. And that massive, staggering figure, that's the mystery we're cracking today. Which brings us right back to that big question. I mean, if the biggest economies in the world, we're talking the US, China, Japan, are all drowning in debt, who's the creditor? Who are the lenders? Is there some secret bank on Mars? It sounds like a riddle, but figuring this out is what this is all about. So, how did we even get here? Let's do a super quick history lesson. The whole idea of a country being in debt has changed a lot. You can pretty much trace the modern system back to 1694. That's when England started selling the first government bonds to fund a war. And, it was a pretty good idea, so it caught on. By the 1900s, countries all over the world were doing it. And then COVID hit, and government borrowing just went into overdrive. And all that history kind of forces us to look at debt a little differently. It's not just this big, scary weight that has to be paid off. It's actually become the fundamental framework, the invisible plumbing of our entire global financial system. It's the core architecture of the modern world. Okay, so now for the main event. Let's pull back the curtain and actually unmask these mysterious lenders. Who owns all this debt? And here's a little spoiler for you. The answer is a lot closer than you probably think. Let's just use the United States as a case study, because it makes this super clear. Now, look at this breakdown. This is where it gets really interesting. A huge chunk, 43%, is owned by domestic groups. We're talking banks, insurance companies, maybe even your own pension fund. Then you've got another 20% that's actually held by other parts of the US government. Seriously. The Social Security Administration, for example, takes its extra cash and buys government bonds because they're seen as one of the safest investments on earth. So what about foreign countries like China and Japan that you always hear about? Well, they hold about a quarter of it. So what's the big takeaway here? It's pretty simple, actually. The biggest lender to America is America. The country basically owes the money to itself, to its people, its companies, its own agencies. Most of the debt is held right there at home. And that just completely flips the script on that common fear, right? The whole idea of some foreign power owning all the debt and pulling the strings. For the US, at least, it's largely a myth. The numbers just don't back it up. This all leads us to this really core idea that basically solves our big mystery. It's called the closed system theory. Just picture the entire global economy as one big sealed box. Inside that box, for every single dollar of debt someone owes, there's a dollar of an asset that someone else owns. One person's IOU is another person's investment. The money isn't going anywhere. It's just moving around inside the box. Here's another way to think about it. If you could magically collect every single financial asset in the world and every single financial debt, and you put them on a giant cosmic scale, it would balance out perfectly. To zero. It's a zero-sum game. All the money is just sloshing around inside this closed system. Okay, but here's where the story takes a really wild turn. This might be the most counterintuitive part of this whole thing. What if I told you that this gigantic mountain of debt was never actually meant to be paid off? Yeah, you heard that right. And that leads us to the real secret sauce of how this whole system keeps chugging along. It's a little trick called refinancing. First off, you have to get one thing straight. Government debt is nothing like your personal debt. With your mortgage or a credit card, the goal is to get that balance down to zero, right? To pay it all off. But for a country, the game is totally different. They're not trying to pay off the principal, they're just focused on making the interest payments. And that big chunk of principal, they just roll it over. See, for an investor, that debt isn't a problem, it's a product. It's a super safe, reliable asset. So how do they roll it over? It's actually pretty simple. When an old government bond comes due, it's time to pay up, the government just issues a new bond and uses that money to pay off the old one. The principal just gets handed off from an old investor to a new one again and again and again. As long as the government keeps making its interest payments, the music never stops. And if you want a perfect example of this in action, look at Japan. Their debt to GDP ratio is a mind-boggling 260%. I mean, that sounds completely insane.
But Japan's economy hasn't collapsed. Why not? Well, two huge reasons. One, just like the US, most of that debt is owned by its own citizens and institutions. And two, it's all in their own currency, the yen, and their central bank has a lot of control over that.
But here's the catch. This whole incredible, complicated system, it all balances on something that you can't even put on a spreadsheet. It's built on trust. And as we all know, trust can be pretty fragile. I think the best way to picture it is like a high wire act. The global economy is walking a tightrope. And that long pole the walker uses to keep their balance, that's just investor confidence. It's the simple belief that a country is good for its word and will keep making its payments, no matter what. And if that trust disappears, if that balancing pole snaps, the fall is catastrophic. When a country defaults, interest rates go through the roof, their currency becomes worthless, and the whole economy just implodes. You don't have to look far to see examples either. Just look at what happened in Sri Lanka or Argentina. Remember the euro crisis back in 2010? This chart here shows how fast things can go wrong. You can literally see the moment trust just evaporated for certain countries. The fear sped like wildfire, threatening to take down the entire eurozone. It was a terrifying reminder of just how interconnected and fragile this whole thing really is.
And that's because not all debt is the same. There's a huge difference here. If you borrow in your own currency, like Japan or the US, you have a lot more control. Your central bank has levers it can pull. But if you borrow in a foreign currency, say the US dollar, now you're playing a much riskier game. Because if your local currency suddenly crashes, the amount you owe in that foreign currency can explode overnight, making it impossible to pay back.
So, let's bring it all home. What's the one big thing to take away from all of this? It's that the system, it doesn't actually run on paying back the debt. It runs on the promise that it will be paid back. It's all built on belief, a global web of promises held together by our collective trust that those promises are good. As long as we all believe, the system keeps going. Which, of course, leaves us with a pretty heavy final question. In today's world, with all the geopolitical tension and debt levels higher than ever, how strong is that promise really? How solid is the trust holding this whole thing up? And what on earth happens if it finally breaks?